I'm a DJ boy, going to Dcentral, making NFT from the values, being crypto poor but JPEG rich.
I'm Steve Huff. I'm the managing editor for the Metaverse Post. We're a new publication covering Web3, NFTs, cryptocurrency, VR, AR, you name it. And I'm happy to be here today. I'm certainly not wearing this jacket outside, but I'm going to introduce you now to our panel, which consists of, it's three people. Diversity, founder of Divine Anarchy. Ryan de Taboada, who is the COO of Decentral Games. And Steve Kuroki, Vice President of Creative at nWAY. Why don't we go around and, starting with Steve, just tell everybody a little more about who you are and your company.
Hear me? Is it working? Yeah, so I guess you could see my Taehoon Kim PFP up there. It's not really me. Steve Kuroki from nWAY. We're a San Francisco-based developer and publisher of mobile and console titles, and now Play to Earn games. We've been doing it for about 10 years. Our first Play to Earn game was actually the Olympics Games Jam, which released with the Olympics a couple months ago. We've since then improved on the game, and we just did an announcement of a food truck coin club. And we have other projects that we're building and hoping to learn a lot this trip.
Ryan.
Right. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan de Taboada, also go by Ryan DG online. Decentral Games has been building games on Polygon, on the Unity Games SDK in Decentraland, going back to about the middle of 2019. And right now our flagship game is Ice Poker, which is a play and earn game centered around NFTs on Polygon. Those NFTs are 3D wearables, and it brings the fun of poker without any gambling whatsoever within the game itself. Think Zynga, but the badges, prizes, items are actually owned by the players. And yeah, really happy to be here.
And then I'm Austin. I go by Diversity. This is actually my first time being doxxed, so welcome to everybody that's in my community that's been watching me. We're building out a Web3, we're gamifying Web3 interactions basically. So when you think of like a signature or any kind of contract interaction, our goal is to gamify that interaction. So if you're looking at like Year in Finance, for example, we're trying to build out an NFT experience that interacts with Year in Finance or any other crypto ecosystem out there, and building out like a gamified experience for people.
Thank you, all three of you. Going to start with just some basic issues about gaming in Web3, which isn't exactly like gaming has always been. And I wanted to talk about some of the challenges that companies doing gaming in Web3 tend to face. The first one that occurred to me is, in addition to getting broad adoption, is the power that's required. The difference between a game that is, computer only, or if you go way back in the day, a DVD, and now when the Metaverse is requiring lots of processing power, it's requiring lower latency. How do companies meet that challenge and still try and keep, let's say, subscription costs lower? And let's go with you, Steve.
Yeah, let's see how I can answer this. I think it first starts with the actual, I'm just approaching it from a game design standpoint. Depending on the type of game you're making, it really depends on the source of power or things that might be required. So a game that, we're an action studio, a game that requires, low latency, high input coming in, it's something that we're always curious about. But when we actually transitioned into doing mobile games, we knew that was a problem, so we had to redesign the game of a fighting game to more of a card-based thing to reduce the inputs. So, moving forward, what we're thinking about is if there is a requirement of power or some sort of technical challenge, you have to look at your game design and take a look and approach it differently. You might not need to have a game that has so much, a need to have all the inputs coming in and all that power. You might not need to have a game that requires a high-end graphic card to play. There's games all across the board. So, the way that we like to think about it anyway is design first, creative first, and then try and apply the technology after.
Ryan.
Yeah, so I think that you kind of have the first layer of complexity in onboarding people, which is getting them familiar with crypto, with wallets, whether it's a ledger or something like MetaMask, basically the self-custody of assets. And there are a couple different projects who are trying to solve that problem and kind of obfuscate that layer a bit to make it simpler. For us, building in Decentraland, which is browser-based but 3D built on Unity, you really need to have a computer with a sufficient amount of RAM. So a lot of other play-and-earn ecosystems and games will have 90 to 95% of their players on mobile. Of course, that's 0% for us right now. You need to not only onboard to crypto itself, to holding assets on Polygon, but also have a computer with that capacity. So we're kind of trying to whittle away at those problems one at a time. For example, going in the opposite direction of a lot of other games that exist today, where we have this 3D version of the game that we're paring down into a mobile browser-based version of the game where we think we can onboard more people that way.
Yeah, so for us, I'm actually slightly different than these two because they actually work a lot on Unity, and I actually come from a web background. And so Unity and 3D assets is not something that's a strong point for me. And that's actually been some of a benefit for when we were developing Divine Anarchy, because like you were saying, RAM and power that it takes to run a game is intense. But if we can use it through a browser and we keep it, what we did was we basically used native browser elements, which prevents you from doing basically draws. And every time you do a draw in a browser, it gets slower and it needs more power and stuff like that. Whereas native elements are very optimized. Most of our stuff runs super fast for that reason, and because we're using native elements. There's some restrictions for that, obviously, like if you were to build something on Unity or one of these other platforms, you get really good interactions, right? Like you can see this whole world coming to life a lot easier. You have to get very creative when it comes to like a web browser side of things. So that's a challenge where we're trying to find what we can use native elements to gamify those things, but it does solve the power problem that people have. You don't have to have a gaming computer to run what we have. One of the things I do have a problem with is latency. Still a work in progress on trying to figure out the best way that we can do that. There is sockets and things like that you can use to be able to build those response times, but you need to have something very fast in order to have a smooth experience. And I think most people building games understand that, and it's a challenge for everybody, I think.
I was another thing I was wondering about that's related to that, and it's about the broader issue of adoption. Compared to games in the past were pretty easy, pretty straightforward to adopt, but now you've got maybe sometimes a little bit of learning curve, but also if there is an issue with resource demands, is there a danger, let's say, of users being priced out of the metaverse sometimes? And, how does a Web3 company meet that challenge or address it, or at least begin to approach it? Why don't you go ahead?
So I think this, again, it goes to where my focus is in keeping it web native. If I keep it web native and I use native elements, I'm not going to price anybody out, because these are native elements that browsers have to be able to support when they go into any other experience. If you go to facebook.com or apple.com, these are just other sites that are using native elements. They render these things and they have these experiences that you don't need to be doing a bunch of renders and like I was saying earlier, draws, which takes the CPU power and things like that. So ideally, I feel like I'm in a pretty good position to stay away from that. But I do completely understand. I mean, like VR is a great example of people getting priced out of experiences. I'm super curious to see what these two actually have to say about it, actually.
Ryan, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So already addressed some of the, you may have like a hardware requirement and cost there, but putting that aside, I think as we all know, NFT asset prices denominated in dollars, whether it's apes, punks, some games that have assets that cost thousands and thousands of dollars, I think there's a place for that, and definitely a niche of users who are interested in having like that very first Genesis set or the very most upgraded thing. But I think it's important that games give players a way to come in and either play like a pared down version of the game or play as a delegated player. I think in the Axie ecosystem they call those scholarships, and find a balance where you can onboard people to have that upward progression. Because a play-and-earn economy isn't going to work if you have 90% of the people coming in playing for free and just solely extracting value with no incentive to move up to, I'm a delegated player, then I'm buying one of the cheapest items, then I'm actually earning my way to either additional items to improve the gameplay experience or additional items so I can start my own, in our case, guild of lending them out. And so basically games should focus on having multiple paths for people who have different, different amounts of crypto and different desire to either invest a lot of time into the game itself or invest a lot of time into this like meta game of building out a guild, which is effectively a small business.
Yeah, just to chime in just a little bit. Yeah, I totally agree with everything that's been said. It's a really tough challenge to kind of balance like the cost of entry with the number of NFTs and like match your tokenomics to it. But I'm up here because I want to make games, and I want to make games that are fun, and try to get as many people in as possible into that experience. So I mean, you could do things like free onboarding, or like maybe it's the non-earnable version of the game. In our Olympics game, we have that. You can play for free and just race and get into it, and then decide whether or not you want to participate in the economy. Not too any different from free to play. I think it has the same kind of approach in trying to get as many players in. And if you want to buy a battle pass and get skins, like it's up to you. No pressure. We're still trying to figure it out, and I don't know if there's a right way to do it. One of the things that we did for our Olympic pin drop, taking in line from NBA Top Shot when you get the boxes and get these pins for collectibles, the minting or experience and the buying experience, getting in queue. We're taking some of those learnings, trying to balance the numbers, trying to figure out when there is a really high expensive box per se, lower the number, because you do want to sell out and make sure that everyone that's participating and buying it gets their value. But when it comes to the game port of it, like it's still we're having discussions all the time. I think the whole point of it though is, we make PvP games. You need to have a lot of people to play. You want it to be fun. We start from there and then try to match the numbers and the costs so that everyone can play as best as we can. But at the same time, we're into things like sneaker culture, Pokemon cards. There is the whole collectible aspect, and people want to get something super valuable, and that's fun in itself, in my opinion. So, a lot of things to take in there from there.
You and I actually were chatting a little bit backstage about the changes in game design, let's say from Web 2 to Web 3. Are designers, for instance, having to rethink the way they approach just from the bottom up, from let's say if it's a game that, like an adventure game that follows a script or branching scripts. How is that changing as you incorporate more metaverse-like elements? Go ahead, Steve.
That's a really tough one. I can give one specific example. In free-to-play games or games in the box product, you might make a stat change. Let's say the weapon attack is like 10 or something like that. And that lives, and you find that it breaks the game. You can make an adjustment. People will complain. You send balance notes, and that's all good. Now we're thinking about things that live on chain, and they have to be, semi-forever. We want to make sure that there's a way to adjust the stats that don't affect the value of the item. I guess if you take an example from Magic, they might pull a card from tournaments. Things like that are things we have to think about. Also trying to design the game for long term. What might be powerful in day one's meta is going to change in 6 months. How do we approach that design challenge without, again, affecting the original NFT balance. Maybe there's a meta shift that we explain through a season, rotating season structure. So a lot of fun things that we can learn from previous games, but also some new rules. And I think that's what at least excites me the most is it's kind of the Wild West. I think we're all trying to figure it out. And, I'm just all in for new experiences, especially with games. We've been playing the same games over and over again. I want to play something new. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Ryan, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, from a technical perspective, there's definitely some tech work required to connect like game events that are happening on Unity in this 3D space to events on the blockchain, oracles that are checking, like, have these tokens been spent? Is this NFT in this wallet that was, connected in the beginning? But it's definitely a balance. Like, there will be successful Web3 NFT games where the gameplay itself, you could say, is hypothetically identical to games we have now, but your Fortnite skins are just something you actually own and can resell on third-party marketplaces or marketplaces within the game, all the way down to where the game mechanics themselves are on chain. And I think that you want to prioritize what's actually important to players and not just say every single thing has to be on chain all the time. So I would say use NFTs, use the blockchain where it makes sense and it's actually adding value for players. And then one other point around pricing that I thought of after I gave the previous answer is just that there actually is a premium on what people are going to be willing to spend on Web3 games versus Web2, just pricing in that potential resale value. And so part of that is going to be speculation, and you might see speculative bubbles within the assets, but we should think that this will persist with Web3 games. If I'm saying, well, I was willing to spend $20 on a skin that I know I can't sell after the fact, how much am I willing to spend on one that might appreciate in value and I know for sure I can sell later? So I don't know what that balance is or what the premium should be, but there is some persistent premium to ownership.
Austin?
When I got into this space, I was expecting to see Valorant and League of Legends and bringing all their skins into like a Web3 like portable deposit or something like that. I'm surprised I still haven't seen it, to be honest. And to his point earlier, I feel your pain when you talk about changing like traits and stuff like that, because I've had times that I wanted to do that, but I know that there's monetary value now behind traits and rarity and things like that, that you just can't modify those things. If you modify it, you're now directly impacting a holder and what their value is, and it does hinder the development of how you would normally go about developing a game massively. Because whatever, it's just like smart contracts. Like when you deploy it, it's got to stay. Like you can't change it. As a game industry, like you should understand that from your holders. And it's definitely a massive challenge that I think we all face.
Thank you, Austin. Speaking of challenges, more and just along that line, I was thinking about, NFT adoption. Zuckerberg introduced a broad audience to the idea of the metaverse. But I don't know if that means everybody understands just how much the web is evolving. And resistance to NFTs is crumbling, or so many celebrities wouldn't be getting into them, right? So I think my question is, as people start struggling, with large economies like the US struggle with things like inflation, what's the challenge in essentially selling your product? Because it's a creative downtime, or it can be. We're seeing practical uses of NFTs expanding all the time too. But address some of the challenges you have in selling a product and getting people to understand, there is a knowledge barrier sometimes, I guess is what I'm getting at. And how do you jump over that and pull more people in? Why don't you go ahead, Austin?
So I think it's definitely the market that we're in right now. We're in definitely a bear market. And I think what really keeps people engaged and stays there, or, you know, because you have to think about retention as well as selling, because you could have a collection, for example, we already have all our stuff out. And so it's about retaining those people that would hold a value for the project. And it's about what can we give them, or what can we put in a certain path that makes them either have fun or be able to really get behind the Web3 aspect of what we're building. Because if you can throw any kind of ownership and start to actually open people's eyes into what Web3 is going to do and how you're doing it, and even if it's just a small little sliver, like we have a lot of development to go, and we have very little developed to be able to say, like, look, this is how Web3 works, and this is how we're going to continue to expand on it. And as long as people can feel it, can experience it at an MVP level, I think that's what you're going to kind of gain your audience with while you continue to build.
Ryan?
Yes, I think the question of onboarding people to Web3 is one that we have really struggled with, and I don't have a great answer to how to bring people into NFTs in the first place, other than that we've seen it happening via word of mouth, essentially. You can make some documentation there, but people need to hear about it from, you know, people they know and trust within their community. We've really targeted trying to capture folks who are already onboarded to Decentraland. So today, Decentral Games is about 60% of Decentraland's traffic on a day-to-day basis, and we've managed to onboard people via events that we hold. So every week we have 3 to 5 events with different projects, people showcasing their NFTs, small projects that might have, you know, 100 followers on Twitter, all the way up to not partnerships, but event spaces with folks like Bored Ape Yacht Club, Atari, Artifact, these communities that have thousands of people, and bringing them in. So I think we've done a decent job of like evangelizing our game, Decentraland itself, the Polygon ecosystem, to some of these other NFT ecosystems. Like if you already have MetaMask, you have NFTs on ETH mainnet, it's not a very big jump to be like, okay, I understand I can connect my wallet to Decentraland, and now I have some assets that are on Polygon, it's the same address as ETH mainnet. So that's been the focus so far as we've ramped up our game from 0 to 10,000 daily actives over the first 8 months or so, is really trying to find product market fit within the NFT community.
Thanks. Steve?
Yeah, let me see. So I think when it comes to onboarding, I think we talked about this backstage. You can approach it through a lot of teaching in your game, UI, UX, tutorials. I think when it comes to like the masses in general, it's going to start with the ones that are curious about this space and really believe in what it can be. There's going to be someone that can put it into perfect words that I definitely can't. That someone can teach their mom how to play our Olympic Games Jam game. It's going to start with the community there. But I think with gamers and like what they pay for. You can go down, I spent $60, $70 on Elden Ring. I got 250 hours plus of fun out of it. But I won't go buy a $5 Starbucks coffee, And it's different for everyone. I think when it comes to the kind of games that you make, we don't want to overpromise on what you can, earn from the game. Again, it's all about having fun. If it's something familiar with a +1, if it's, Fall Guys racing Olympics with the chance to win an NFT prize or some, token, that's easy to kind of understand and put in one sentence. And I think it starts with those kind of games first. And then as we get to, more complex games like, I don't know, like an EVE Online, which I still can't understand, being in games all this time. Like, I think that's going to have its own space, and I'm really fascinated about where the games can go in Web3 with, massive economies like that. But I think it's going to be, steps. Over this, year, we're going to see, hundreds of games coming out, everyone trying something new, something's going to stick. And then people are like, well, I need to go play that because, everyone at school is playing that. So I think it's just going to start with the gamers and the community, and eventually this will probably not be a problem anymore.
The same engine that's kind of been carrying games along in the past. The word of mouth, and as well as just ambient adoption. I see Elden Ring passing through my Twitter feed, every other 5 tweets sometimes. And eventually I'm going to try and check it out, my next question, it's probably infuriatingly open-ended, but it's worth asking, and I'll start with you, Steve. Where do you see gaming in the metaverse, let's say in 2030?
Oh, man, you'd ask me that question. 2030?
Yeah, let's say 2030, or in the next 5 years.
I'll be practical. I'd love to see a lot more augmented reality games so that you can still be in the presence of somebody. We can play battle chess. I could throw my Pokemon out there while we're even talking and they're dancing, stuff like that. Just super simple for me. I just really want to see games be more, I think the definition of game is, all over the place, but really it's about, a group of people doing something together that's fun. If that could be in virtual space, that's all and fine, but for me, being a little bit of an older generation of gamer, I'd rather be in the presence of someone doing something that's using the technology in the right way. And that's just visual, right? On top of that, the whole digital ownership is super cool. I hope that the NFT pins that we designed this year show up in 2030 in some form, whether it's walking around in space crushing people or, there's a museum all around, like the whole Ready Player One thing, I think could still become a reality. So, we'll see.
That's a great answer. Thanks. Ryan?
Yeah, so 2030, that one is tough because I was thinking, what did the metaverse look like in 2014? But I think to echo some of those sentiments, like the metaverse is not just about one virtual space like Ready Player One, or that Dcentral will be the metaverse, or maybe it's Sandbox, and you have people debating like what level of decentralization is appropriate at the server level, or people running nodes. The metaverse is about the digital asset ownership and being able to bring your identity, your reputation, your tokens, your assets across all of these different platforms, which I think that, of course, the visual experience will get better and better, and we'll start to see things like VR and AR. But also by then, or by some arbitrarily long period of time, we'll have those connections both across chains and solving some of the harder problems, like we actually design, every set we release is 50 3D files that represent wearables within the metaverse. So it's like 5 items, 5 levels, and male and female avatars is what Decentral supports. But you couldn't take that NFT and wear it in Sandbox or Crypto Voxels or something, because they just have different visual representations of assets. And so people building bridges between virtual spaces that are 2D and 3D, so social platforms like Twitter, Instagram, 3D platforms like Sandbox and Decentral. So I think we'll start to see a lot more connection between platforms and actually being able to take your avatars and assets across them.
Thank you, Ryan. Austin?
Yeah, Metaverse has always been like this, for some reason, a weird concept in the space that nobody really has defined very well. I think I agree with Ryan's statement the most. It's about moving your asset into somebody else's kind of verse that they've built. And a couple of people are working on this. For the next 30 years, I probably don't have an answer on that one, but for 5 years, I'm super interested to see what other side actually comes out with. They've already announced an SDK. That's something I'm super interested to see how it actually flows. They have the right funding for it. So there's definitely a lack of funding in this space to build out super great platforms, but I think other side definitely has the funding to do it. So I'm super excited to see what they come out with and how they're going to progress this space. It's also going to be a telltale sign of if that's what we should do. Should we be trying to integrate those SDKs and stuff like that? Seeing how that adoption actually comes in is going to be a very important sign for the market, I think, as well.
Thank you, Austin. It looks like we're about at time, so please give these guys a hand. Steve Kuroki, Ryan Ryan de Taboada, thank you, sorry, and Austin Diversity of Divine Anarchy. Thank you for the discussion. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for your time.